trees is what a man knows of fire. This is what young Jean-Claude's father tells him as they traipse through the forests of Clairvaux-les-Lacs in the east of France. These are the old forests of the Gauls, the forests of fairy tale and legend. Woods where a beauty might meet a prince gallivanting as a beast, or where answering a goblin's riddle could lead to an easy pot of gold buried in a stump. Normally, the woods are thick and dark and cool, but today, they are burning. It's not so great a blaze as to force the pair to run for their lives. In fact, Jean-Claude's father is the one who started the fire. It is small and barely hot enough to cut away the mists creeping off the lake beside town. A lake that from an aerial view sits like a drop of clear blue water set amongst the black etchings of the thick tree cover on the hills. Jean-Claude lets his eyes wander over the lake to the man-made forest of sailboat masts sitting still and straight beside the docks. Summer will come in earnest soon, and the wealthy people who live in the cities will flock to the lake for vacation. Some will stay all summer because they are able to work from wherever they want with just a telephone and some stationery. Their children will run and play at the beach while they frequent the cafes and trade upper-class war stories. The trials of boarding school, the hardship of missing cans this summer, the myriad of other difficulties that come with being rich and bored. Those important people, those beautiful and interesting people, they would blow in and out like the rain, pouring on him until he was soaked to the bone. Soaked, but never soaking it in. Little Jean-Claude would listen to them talk and watch them play and would never be able to be one of them. He would try. He had tried before. He had spent one whole week last summer with a pretty, brown-eyed girl, telling her stories he'd heard the year previous, trying to make himself into the boy he'd heard them from, an athletic blonde Austrian whose family had maybe got some of their fortune from the Nazis and maybe not. He played coy with the stories and the girls ate it up. The danger of it all. How vogue. How risque. That first attempt at being someone else had ended when the girl asked if he'd come water skiing with her family in the lake. It wasn't so much different from snow skiing, he reasoned. He'd probably handle himself wonderfully. And he'd believed in his head that perhaps it was true. Perhaps he really was an incredible skier. And how hard could it be if that little Nazi could do it? He'd even been on his way to the beach that next morning when he'd seen somebody actually doing what he'd merely spoken about. They skipped over the waves at what seemed 1,000 kilometers per hour. All that power pulling somebody forward. He could never do it. Not in truth. And so he'd retreated to these woods, hiding out with his dog, his only friend, for all of summer until the girl and everybody else had gone. The smell of smoke snaps him from his reverie. He's forced to cough and is alarmed when he can't stop. His father, face concerned, yells for him to hurry and catch up. The burn line is spreading to the trenches they've dug. Jean-Claude obliges, coughing and burying his face in his hands, trying to wipe away the tears that come along with every painful inhalation. He looks back just once to where he'd been standing only seconds ago, and sees a field of blackened vegetation speckled with glowing orange coals and embers. A sort of inverted solar system that pulls his gaze in an uncomfortable way. It's so strange, Papa, that any of this works. His father lights a smoke and nods, then holds a hand out for him to cross the ditch. There is a deep rut there that they've been digging for days with hand tools and a gasoline-powered trencher. In some places, there are great dead trees that have been felled and dropped into the burn zone by his father's chainsaw, a tool Jean-Claude is still too young to use. His father points.
Trees burn, my son, and fire is always coming for them.
The fingers of his glove are dark with dried sap and carbon and oil. For a second, Jean-Claude swoons. His father's gloves are now dripping with blood. The man's face is nothing more than a ruined skull with smoke pouring upward out of the eye sockets. Then, all is right again. though the lightheadedness remains.
What we burn here today makes sure the fire will not get to those trees. Or those.
He says, pointing at different parts of the forest.
The dry season is coming, and with it comes imbeciles who throw away cigarettes out their windows and fail to stomp out their cook fires.
His father crushes his cigarette on the heel of his boot, then pockets the butt while dropping a wink at his boy, before continuing.
But if you let the fire burn good and hot for a little while, in the right place, the larger fire that comes, the one that wants to destroy everything, will have nowhere to go.
The man looks down at his son and smiles, the lesson complete, and is happy to see his boy nodding along with him. Jean-Claude is different, he understands. He needs extra help, extra time. He sees so much in his son, all but how the fire dances in his eyes, as it eats the trees.
The world is pretty scary, but there's another world, hidden just below the surface. It's called the dark web. Every 2 seconds, there is a new victim of identity theft, which means a criminal could be spending your money, applying for loans in your name, and even damaging your credit, the good credit you've worked so hard to build. Unfortunately, you could miss certain threats to your identity by just checking bank statements and monitoring your credit. Good thing there's LifeLock Identity Theft Protection. LifeLock uses proprietary technology to detect and alert you to a wide range of identity threats, like your social security number for sale on the dark web. It's a nice one. I have it right here. And if you do have an issue involving identity theft, one of LifeLock's identity restoration specialists will work to fix it. Of course, no one can prevent all identity theft or monitor all transactions at all businesses. But with LifeLock, you get identity theft protection and additional features to help protect your devices against cyber threats for as low as $9.99 a month. Don't waste another second. Visit lifelock.com/Monstruo now and save an extra 10% on your first year. That's lifelock.com/Monstruo for an extra 10% off. lifelock.com/Monstruo. It's late, right before closing, when Jean-Claude opens the heavy wooden door of the gun shop. Rusty hinges scream out in protest as he enters, effectively signaling his arrival. Above the entrance hangs a worn little bell that uselessly chimes as the door strikes it. It's patinaed, dull, and bent, the result of countless beatings via the brutish gamesmen who oft swing the door forward, like a drunk finally returned home. The shop smells like any other. The universal odor of such places, wood and gun oil mixed with the acrid, sour stench of spent gunpowder. In France, the thrill of the hunt is not only reserved for love, but for wild game as well. The evidence of this, greeting Jean-Claude through the dull eyes of chamois and roe deer, whose heads seem to turn slightly from their placements on the cabinesque walls, and this new visitor tentatively makes his way through the eerily quiet yet cozy establishment of death. When the shop's proprietor finally emerges from the back, it strikes Jean-Claude that this man, like the door chime, appears to have been at service for ages. A little dull and a little bent, his weathered face carrying a perpetual look of dissatisfaction.
Bonjour, bonjour, comment ça va?
This tired greeting is preceded by a purplish plume of pipe smoke. Jean-Claude squints into the sticky, sweet cloud, raising a hand to his mouth and stifling a cough. before regrouping and approaching the counter with confidence.
I would like a suppressor for a .22 caliber carbine and some subsonic rounds, please. Also a stun baton and a couple canisters of bear spray.
The shopkeeper takes his time, first gathering the smaller items. Jean-Claude, meanwhile, picks nervously at his stubby yet perfectly spaced rows of teeth, making as if he's interested in a rifle rack. The old man looks over his shoulder at him as he rises with the items, knees popping, then peels open a stained grin. His customer is an unassuming man of average height and build, though slightly paunchy with a hairline that's receding. His smile seems to sink back into his face when reciprocating the shopkeeper's hospitality. This isn't a typical transaction, as it's clear that the purchaser is out of his element, maybe more comfortable at a bakery or the local jeweler. He sets the suppressor down next to the other items on the counter, as his suspicion is confirmed.
I wonder, kind sir, do you gift wrap?
The shopkeeper appears nonplussed by the request, then reluctantly nods and takes to the task of ringing up the arsenal. He sighs as he collects a roll of brown paper from under the counter and places it on top with some twine. As his customer looks on dumbly, he hastily wraps the items before ducking them into a bag. Of course, this is all unnecessary. The odd request to gift wrap such items is a subtle detail to sell a lie about his father-in-law. In truth, he doesn't have a hunting trip planned at all. There's probably no need to deceive the old man, but lying is his nature. He had spent time fabricating a story just for the occasion, and could not help but employ it when the opportunity presented itself. Jean-Claude wrestles the large bag off the counter, then awkwardly pays in cash over it before thanking the old man and turning to leave. As he exits, the shopkeeper bellows after him.
Happy hunting.
Ramon waves a thank you over his shoulder, never looking back. He is officially on the hunt, though not for wild game. His quarry is closer than any animal cautiously sniffing berries in the woods, though the process necessary to bring it down is much more complicated and daunting. As he traverses the damp parking lot back to his car, he kicks rocks and laments as to how he's arrived at this point. From learning lessons in the woods with his father to taking his first steps just now in his odious plan. How many middle-aged men might look back at their life's journey, searching for where they went wrong, and see a clear way to remedy the missteps going forward. Ramon envies these men, as his accomplishments are a complete farce. His entire existence a product of his own creation, an intricately woven web of lies, each lie a strand in the pattern, and each strand intertwined with a series of others, supporting them and supported by them. His life is a beautiful thing to behold, but too delicate to touch. Any slight disruption will rip it to shreds. He reaches his car and opens the trunk, where he places the items beside the 2 cobwebbed and soon-to-be-filled fuel jugs, along with a .22 caliber rifle borrowed from his father. It isn't much to look at, the rifle. It's comprised of all the parts a gun should have: a barrel, a chamber, a hammer, a trigger. But to Jean-Claude, it's more than the sum of its parts. It's a key to his salvation. He wipes tears from his eyes and pours himself into the driver's seat, softly clicking the door shut. It's nice to be alone, cocooned in silence. For a moment, there's no trouble. The constant stress of keeping the lie separate and afloat has been overwhelming. The very thought of there being a chance to relieve it all brings another wave of peace. But then, the weight is back, along with the smell of smoke. His eyes begin to water profusely. The fire is close now. He dismisses the thought, then hunches over the wheel and mutters to himself, looking like a gargoyle as he starts the vehicle and swings it out of the parking lot. The drive home brings him near the French-Swiss border, a border he crosses every day on the way to work. He'd lasted 18 years, almost 2 decades since that first lie. The lie of having passed his medical exam and become a certified doctor. No more long days spent at the library or sitting in his car staring off into space crunching debts. It was finally time to clean the slate, to sweep the web away in one fell swoop. He'd tried to save those caught within it, but they had become too aware of their predicament. This was for their own good. As pulses of streetlight cast fleeting moments of illumination through the windshield, interrupting his commissions with the dark, Jean-Claude spots a petrol station and takes the exit towards it. He wonders, as he pulls up to the pumps, how he will get through the late dinner Florence is preparing. His appetite is non-existent. He's too full of anticipation.
Dinner is waiting, along with his family, when he returns home. His wife, Florence, his beautiful wife, his gorgeous wife, his loving and supporting wife, Florence, is smiling at him. She is smiling at him. She is happy, he supposes. "Can you smell that?" he blurts, and the family jumps in unison at the dinner table. He's spoken to loudly. Florence gives him an odd look. Jean-Claude looks down at his plate and sees he hasn't touched it. His hands are laying palms up on his thighs. She must have been smiling out of curiosity. What a dear and lovely woman. An appropriate woman for a man like him to have. People see her on his arm and they say, "Look at him. That man. He's not much in the face, but with a woman like that on his arm, by God, he must be smart and successful and hard-working and honest and maybe even good in bed." He looks up from his hands and asks, "What were we talking about?" But the dining room is gone. His wife isn't there either, only his youngest child, Antoine. His little boy has his covers pulled up to his chin. The room he shares with his sister is almost totally dark, and his eyes are little more than 2 golden highlights of the moon outside the window. Jean-Claude leans closer and closer to his son. There is something wrong with those highlights. The way they dance and flicker is completely wrong. Wrong. Not right. Wrong. But everything is all right. All right. His boy pulls the covers up over his face and shakes his head. He's clearly frightened, but it's only his father in here, and his sister, Caroline. There's nothing to be afraid of in here. Everything's just fine. C'est très bien. He turns to his daughter and sees she's sitting up on her bed with a confused look on her face. Hello, sweetie, Jean-Claude says. She gives him a painful half smile. What's wrong? Everything's okay, isn't it? It isn't. He's been scaring them with a revised fairy tale. The one with the wolf and the pigs. Jean-Claude looks blankly at his daughter. She explains that in their father's version, 3 little pigs had gathered in a brick house while a fire raged outside, and they'd invited the big bad wolf in to help blow the fire away. But when he huffed, and he puffed, his blowing only made the fire worse, and it burned the whole world to ashes. Jean-Claude nods and stands, walking to the bedroom door and placing his hand on the frame. There is some light on, in the bathroom maybe, that casts a glow down the hallway, leaving the wall behind him lit and Jean-Claude in silhouette. He stands still for a long while as his children watch, wrapped and still in their beds. Caroline, what does Daddy do for a living? He asks suddenly. It startles them both, the same as at dinner that night, when Daddy had slapped a hand on the table after Mummy asked if he'd be paying back her parents soon. Caroline says something in a small voice. The word doctor is audible. She's only 7 and a shy thing. Such a tiny, perfect little girl. Her brother Antoine is 5. They are both beautiful, like their mother, and honest, like their father, or so people say. That's right, Jean-Claude says, shutting the door and leaving without another word. He walks down a hallway of spinning red light and black shadow, a corridor to another world that ends in his kitchen. He's fumbling through the drawers, pushing aside every sharp and pointy bit of metal. I wouldn't stab my wife, he thinks to himself. I wouldn't shoot my wife. I wouldn't cut my wife. The rattling seems loud at this late hour, and when he looks outside, he's surprised to see the sun rising slowly over the trees. The sky is still purple and bruised from the preceding night, a night soon to end. His fingers wrap around the handle of a rolling pin.
The house is quiet, save the disconcerting ticks and tocks of the grandfather clock downstairs. Time is finally up. Jean-Claude is walking through a hallway of infinite length. It is both the hallway that leads him to his bedroom and, as he looks back, an alley that ends with a ladder that leads impossibly up, into a well-lighted galley where professionals are conversing with one another. They are talking about him. He knows. Maybe he should set them straight. But it's too bright up there, he thinks. People will see him, see his eyes staring wide and the stubble on his chin, the chewed rolling pin in his hand. No. Better to keep walking the other direction. The hallway is littered with old business cards, all bearing his name. He can see that they are official, the type one earns from the World Health Organization, a corporation, before embarking on a career. Not the shameful, cheap kind you have to make as a joke at the print shop in Paris. The cards flutter down from the darkness above. They stick in his hair and thicken on the ground like snow, so that every stride drags pulps at his heels, then sends a cascade of reanimated cards ahead. He grabs one out of the air and looks at it. It's so heavy, so authentic, printed on real paper, embossed even. But when he traces the letters of his own name and the title beneath, Director of Medical Studies, the ink smears across the card, leaving only clean white paper, a completely empty surface unfilled. He looks down the hall, rubbing the smudge away on his shirt collar, and witnesses the portraits of his family come to life. They are turning their heads. His daughter Caroline is crying and covering her eyes so she can't see him. Same with his wife and son, his parents, even his pets. His wife stirs as he comes to stand over their bed. She is gorgeous. The early morning light falls through the window and catches in her hair just so. There's not a man alive who wouldn't sell his soul to jump into bed with her just then. She cracks an eye halfway open and smiles, then tugs at the hem of his pants. He returns the smile, but something isn't right in it. It seems to sink back rather than spread, and her expression curdles a moment before he smashes in her head with the rolling pin. From a medical standpoint, the damage is sufficient. The patient is vibrating, body suffering from spasms caused by severe brain damage to the frontal cortex and hemorrhaging throughout the skull. Jean-Claude raises the pin again as his wife's body involuntarily tucks up into a protective position. Being a doctor, he knows that this is merely the spinal cord and back brain functions trying their best to keep the body alive. Her consciousness has been switched off. There's no pain.
I would never hurt my wife.
He brings the blunt instrument down again, and again, and again. Then assesses his patient. Florence twitches, and Jean-Claude shakes his head in pity, raising the gore-encrusted rolling pin high. From downstairs, the grandfather clock begins its strike of 5, and then so does he. Monstruo is an Incongruity Media production. If you've enjoyed this experience, please subscribe and leave a positive review. You can find out more by searching for Monstruo Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or visit us at monstruopodcast.com. This show is produced, hosted, and written by Jack Luna and Mike Boudet. Additional writing by Tyler Bell and Evan Ziegelman. Research by Hagar Barak. Sound design and editing by Jonathan McMichael and Robert Ravelli. Original score by Leon Rogers. Art by Denny Ray.